Welcome back, everyone. And I want to welcome you to our closing plenary. It's going to be a very amazing panel presentation here with discussion with the leaders from major CDFIs from across the country who have formed a key partnership, the Partners for Rural Transformation, also known as PRT. So for this segment, I will turn over the facilitation to Crystal Cornelius, who's going to be moderating this panel. Thank you.
Good afternoon, all, and thank you all so much for joining us our last 3 days of our 6th annual Native CDFI Capital Access convening. This is our closing plenary, and I can't say how happy I am to be talking with fellow friends, colleagues, and fighters of social justice within the United States. A brief explanation in talking about, and for some of you that aren't aware of Partners for Rural Transformation, I'm going to lay a little bit of groundwork in regards to our partnership, how that evolved, and then we'll be hearing from the 6 CEOs of CDFIs that encompass this relationship. So first and foremost, Partners for Rural Transformation is a group of individuals, a group of organizations, 6 CDFIs that have been working in the deepest pockets of poverty in the United States. And we define those as persistent poverty areas. Persistent poverty areas essentially are 20% of your population experiencing poverty for 30 years or more. And just very briefly, just to give you a visual of what that looks like in regards to encompassing the United States, Alaska, and Hawaii, I have a quick slide that I just want to put up for a couple of moments to give our audience, again, a visual representation of the communities that we're going to be talking about within this plenary, and to also show, and we'll be discussing location within these measures as well. Thank you, Heather. So what we see here is essentially persistent poverty counties in the US. You'll see that that's concentrated quite a bit within the southern region, within a great majority of the Midwest, and within the East Coast as well. So can we see the next slide, please, Heather? And this is somewhat compiling with what we're looking at in regards to persistent poverty. And here we see basic child poverty rate. So when we're looking at what concentrated poverty looks like and where are those spaces, we see that some of these spaces really have been extractive within government measures of natural resources, and really areas of rural communities that are remote and don't have access not only to capital, but larger systems to incorporate community change. Thank you. Can you take that slide down for me, Heather? Appreciate it. So the encompassment of Partners for Rural Transformation, again, is 6 CDFIs and their CEOs, our CEOs, who work together to form a collaborative voice on many measures to really alleviate persistent poverty, be able to engage communities, change our narratives, increase capital, and strengthen local capacity within our respective areas as a whole. I'm so very happy to introduce, and we'll be asking poignant questions first, but as an introduction to our membership, Bill Bynum, CEO of Hope Credit Union. And Bill's organization represents Mississippi Delta. And we also have Jim King, CEO of FAHI, whose organization essentially represents Appalachia. Nick Mitchell from Come Dream, Come Build, representing the Colonias. Ines Polinas from Communities Unlimited. And again, working in Mississippi Delta and Black Belt area. And finally, Suzanne Arnandi from RCAC. And a lot of her CDFI's work encompasses, although she's a national organization, deep pockets of poverty in California with migrant workers. So essentially, we're going to be talking about how did we form, what are we doing collectively, and what do we all have in common within measures to change the economic landscape of our communities. So again, persistent poverty, and especially in looking at Native communities, has existed since colonization began. And one thing that we find in working as CDFIs in these respective asset deprived communities is we're often very isolated. We're isolated in measures of being able to address capital. We're isolated in measures of being able to be heard on a larger political stance where we can make policy change for federal endeavors, which really open up opportunities for infrastructure and capital injection into our rural communities. And more so than not, what we find, and especially as we're looking at where America stands today, just in accord with our diversity, equity, and inclusion, looking at our racial discord, looking at how COVID has really brought up marginalized communities and the disappropriation of healthcare facilities, of capital access. So many of these measures of inequality we're dealing with as America for the first time in many regards, even though many of us that are joining this conference and within the panel itself have been working essentially our entire lifetimes to be able to break those barriers. But back to narrative. A lot of the narratives that we find, whether that's Indian country is a risky bet, what poverty means. Poverty is intentional on behalf of the individual that is living in it. Pull up your bootstraps and get over it. So many of these misconceptions, and understanding why, how poverty and these concentrated areas, why are they existing? What were the barriers to not allow them to integrate into normal economic streams as other communities or urban communities did? That's something that we all had to deal with on an organizational level, and again, have been working collectively together, but as a CDFI industry to address those issues. So as we start talking about the formation, how we came together, I want to add one note. We have had the opportunity and have been very blessed to have received formal funding from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Prior to that, we were a working group that had named ourselves the Persistent Poverty Working Group. And we're like, well, that's kind of a dire name. That's what we're doing. But we came together essentially as volunteers. Nobody paid us. We knew that this was important and were able to get formalized in a measure of receiving grant funding. And we'll talk about that more on how that really gave us a different trajectory of what we were looking at. But within that funding, we have all been able to visit our respective communities, and it really has changed my life in measures. It's made me stronger, and it has made me open my eyes in measures in which I didn't think possible. So a brief conduit to that. Again, within the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's funding, we all knew that we all experienced the same barriers, but having the opportunity to visit the colonias, that was the first time I saw the wall. That was the first time we see just such a disparity of humanity in some regard, and how empowering it was to see what Nick and his organization is doing along the border. I'll give a brief example at the end of our dinner and visiting the colonias and looking at how similar this was to so many reservation communities. At the end of the day, however, I start seeing this huge swath of individuals with wagons filled up with food, filled up with provisions. And I asked Nick, what's going on here? For the migrants on the other side of the wall, and there's not necessarily resources in the United States side or the Mexican side of the border, the most vulnerable communities are getting what little of they have together to make sure to cross the border, and these individuals can eat and have what they need for their children. Phenomenal. When I'm able to visit Appalachia and see how very similar we are in retaining our culture, having pride within our culture, having pride within, even though if we're working off, basically nothing, our commitment to each other as communities has kept us vibrant in many, many ways in which America doesn't realize. So I really hope we can, portray the strength of what we're doing, the strength of what we're trying to achieve collectively, not only for Indian country, but for all of the people that don't have voices, that we're trying to change those barriers. And I think one thing that we found such strength in, the partnership, the trust, the vulnerability we've shown with each other. We know that we can't do this alone, and we are so much stronger together and fighting this fight, and especially in our areas that need it most, our most vulnerable communities. So with that, I would really like to hear from Bill Bynum, our fearless leader, on the advent of PRT. And what did you feel as somewhat being the ringleader and bringing us all together? What did you see in your years of experience working with Hope and working with marginalized communities that really brought the breath of life to where we're standing today as partners for real transformation?
Chris, so first I want to say thank you for having us. I wish we could all be together. I think one of the things that has strengthened us is the fact that we do really value the experience of being with each other, being with other people who care about these issues, who work on them day after day, deep into the night, early in the morning, and learning from each other. I think that's certainly been a great byproduct of our work together. But quite honestly, it started with some of the things that you just so eloquently described. It started with the data. Every organization that is represented in the Partners for Rural Transformation have long history of working with people in places that are woefully behind the rest of the population, the rest of the country, with regard to income, wealth, opportunity. I actually think our first, I think he's called the working group. I think our first framing, we struggle as nonprofits with names. We're can be pretty bad about it. I like how Nick has sort of synthesized his down. But we started as a campaign to tackle persistent poverty. I think that was one of the first sort of ways that we did to try to change the narrative, as you described. And I think that has been a part of it. But more than anything, we looked at the data, and the Housing Assistance Council, one of our national partners, done a great job of mapping counties where persistent poverty is most entrenched. And here in my part of the country, we did a deep dive on how this plays out across Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee, Louisiana. And we found that a third of those counties that were on the map that you described are in our footprint. But we also saw that they're in Native country and in Indian country. They're on the U.S.-Mexico border. They're in Appalachia. They're across the country, and that they disproportionately affect people of color. And so we knew that it was important to align ourselves with others to amplify our voices, to learn from each other, and to really do what I think we've done in our region, lifting up the voices of the people we work for, but linking our arms together and doing that in a louder, more effective way. First person I reached out to was Jim King. Jim and Fahi and my colleagues at Hope had done exchanges. We visited each other. We knew that we had a lot more in common than we had that divides us. Even though the folks I serve happen to be in the Mississippi Delta and the Black Belt of this region and are disproportionately Black. White folks in Appalachia who are poor and entrenched in persistent poverty have a lot more in common with with people that I'm working with than they do people who live in affluent, more prosperous places. And so Jim had the chair of the House Appropriations Committee in his area. I had the chair of the Senate's Appropriation Committee in our area in Mississippi. And we took data to them and jumped on the table and said, look, here is what is going on in your states. And they paid attention. And we were able to collectively get them to put a little bit more attention on these areas. And Jim reached out to we reached out to you all, and I'm really excited about how that has evolved. I'm I put a picture on the screen earlier, just when we were and before the session started, and it was a picture of Vice President Harris with Chairwoman Waters of the House Financial Services Committee, Mark Warner, who introduced legislation on the Senate side, along with then Senator Harris, now Vice President Harris, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and Lisa Mensah, who we have worked with. We've worked with to push more resources from USDA into these areas. And they just announced the first $1.25 billion of $12 billion for CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions. And Secretary Yellen said that that $12 billion is more than has gone into CDFIs in the entire 26 years of the program. The $12 billion that they'll be allocating over the coming several months. And your fingerprints are all over that. Our collective fingerprints are over that. Our data, our advocacy, our lifting up the voices of Native Americans, Latino Americans, Black Americans, rural Americans, very different geographies, but very common challenges, is why we came together as Partners for Rural Transformation.
That's perfect, Bill. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add to that? No? Okay, that's great. Jim. And I have to thank Jim so much. Jim, in essence, upon the initial formation of the Partners for Rural Transformation, reached out to OWISTA and opened that up to Indian country in and of itself, and always so eternally grateful for that. Jim, in working in Appalachia for so very long, and your organization is really quite interesting. You're a CDFI, and we're very similar as OWISTA in that we support native CDFIs, but your organization supports a wide breadth of nonprofits that really act as the institutors of capacity change within your region to build up those resources. One thing that we all find within the CDFI industry itself, native CDFIs, is the lack of access to capital, the right amount of capital, larger amounts of capital in terms that are really beneficial to strengthening what we need to build our communities. So can you just speak on what you find some of the greatest opportunities may be for Partners for Rural Transformation, or what you find thematically just within our conversations and capitalization on ways to leverage our voice, our capacity in this measure to really get capital into persistent poverty areas?
Sure. Well, I want to thank you for inviting me to this conversation, and it's always a pleasure to be with you and the rest of the partners. And for sure, when Bill and I talked about like who else do we need in this group, like when we thought of you and OWISTA, we knew that you guys had to be part of this. It was top of mind. Yeah, so I think the issue of capital, when I think about capital and what the strategy is that I think as a group we had to undertake, I think I start first with sort of like, why doesn't money want to flow to the regions we work in and to the populations we work with? So often it's outside of the mainstream, and then you end up with lots of predatory practices and other things. And I think there's a lot of opportunity, but at the same time we have to sort of, I think it helps to sort of think about like, you know, where's our starting point? And I think each of our regions and each of our organizations is actually dealing with what has been a historic lack of investment in the places that we live and work. And so one place that I think when we're going back to sort of Bill's comment about data, one of the places of data that I think we looked at was around philanthropic giving, and funds explicitly benefiting Native Americans is only like 0.5% or less of major foundation giving. And that was true over like, you know, more than a decade. And so it's not trending the way we'd like. I think when we look at like the Mississippi Delta or Appalachia and even the Rio Grande Valley, we're still looking at like $50 per person per year or less. I think in the Delta, more like about $42 or $43 compared to the national average of more like 450. And I just use that as a marker to say that that's one type of money. And in comparison, we're looking at 10% or less of what other parts of the country tend to get. And when it comes to just getting investments from banks and private capital, I think our regions have just lagged as well. And so it is required strategy, and I think that's where it takes sort of our collective work to sort of make capital flow to places that it wouldn't otherwise want to go. So what I think what we've rallied around is this idea of establishing a persistent opportunity fund. And we wanted to build on our experience to raise and deploy capital, because together we do billions of dollars of work as a collective group, which I think makes us more powerful as a collective than we are on our own. When we talk about this as a fund, I think it's $1 billion was kind of our persistent opportunity fund sort of goal, and so we're looking at capital grants, operating grants, federal funds, and for sure I think where the bigger money is private capital. Coming, whether that's from banks, which have been traditional for CDFIs, but I think there's a lot of investors from sort of the West Coast is a way to think about big tech companies. And so to date, I think where we're at is about 262 million of our $1 billion goal has been identified across the 6 organizations. So I feel like we're getting there. To link it to sort of more specifically federal, because Bill talked about, and I don't think that I don't want to gloss over this point. As organizations that work in rural places, we often end up with legislators who is not always a good thing, but I think it can be good when you've got people who have seniority in the ranks. And that's how we end up with a chair of Senate appropriation in one of our regions, or House appropriations in a different part of the country. We've been able to make, I think, real progress with the FHFA and the government-sponsored enterprises on duty to serve, and really holding them to account over where they're making mortgage money available, to whom that's serving, and in what kind of capital that's going to be. And that's an ongoing piece. CRA reform is something that I think we've worked on, and we all rally around that because we know the way that those regulations were set up work well in some parts of the country, but don't serve particularly rural markets very well. And so we don't want to take anything away there, but we are pushing for that to be strengthened. We had real progress on the Clyburn Amendment, which I think we sometimes talk about as 10-20-30 legislation, which is targeting 10% of USDA and Treasury dollars to places of persistent poverty, which are communities that have at least a 20% poverty rate for the last 30 years. And I think we're making some headway in getting that expanded to other federal programs. I think that's on our legislative agenda. And then the expansion of the CDFI fund, which I know we played a part in, and Bill already made, I think, a nod to that, which is geared towards driving capital to our regions. And then just lastly, I would say on the private capital, just promoting the work of PRT and our populations with large corporations and banks to funnel that money. So we are having conversations as a group with not just banks, but big tech stock companies and some others who can make a big difference, I think, in bringing capital. So I think strategy wise for us, it just comes down to, we can't wait for the money to show up. We have to go out and get it and drag it in. And that's so much easier with friends. Yeah.
I think that's a perfect rendition. And it sounds like a mouthful. And for those of us on the the PRT team, we do work so very diligently, and our staff work so very diligently on all of these different pillars to really try to provide that collective voice that not only affects policy, that affects narrative change, that affects community engagement and capitalism. I think it's a wonderful orchestra of how we have utilized all of our particular strengths as organizations or contacts, and really been able to get our voices into different corridors and platforms. And looking also at the overall gist of what we do as organizations respectively, granted we each have our own, I would say, strengths, whether that's housing, entrepreneurship, consumer lending, all, capacity building, certainly. And in regards to hope, creating financial institutions within his credit union expansion, when banks were leaving and the Mississippi Delta, I mean, they really stepped in. And this all comes down and dwindles down, in essence, to building platforms of opportunity, building platforms of stewardship, building platforms of entrepreneurship and homeownership, really creating assets. So Inez, I would love to hear from you and the respective work that we do as PRT. It is all meant to build upon those platforms, to enhance these opportunities, and to really offer an opportunity for entrepreneurs to thrive within your respective work. And I think it would be a wonderful example as well, because we're talking a little bit broadly, but we have coordinated together as a group for, aside from tangible policy assets, to helping entrepreneurs. And how can we do that? So just within looking at what we're trying to do on a microcosm itself, going out into the larger world, can you tell us what you feel PRT's strengths are in supporting entrepreneurship as a whole? And more so, I'd really love if you could detail the story of your small business owner in which you were able to get participation lending from several of our members to be able to help this client during COVID.
Thanks, Crystal, and thank you for the invitation. It's such an honor to speak with everybody who's attending here. So I want to talk about entrepreneurship maybe at two different levels, and I think that mirrors what our other partners are doing within the Partners for Rural Transformation, and that is really the entrepreneurial mindset. And part of that is the actual entrepreneurs, which I'll talk about here in a second, but the other is really beginning to shift in areas of persistent poverty, this mindset of, we got to wait for somebody to save us. I think what's clear to all six of us is no, our states aren't going to save these communities. Our federal government isn't going to save these communities. These communities are going to need to save themselves. And so how do we bring in the capacity building and the capital to allow them to do that? A great book out there, if folks are interested in, it's a little dated, 2005, called Energizing Entrepreneurs by Don Mackey and Deb Markley. It's sort of a standard read in our organization because it looks at this idea of an entrepreneurial mindset, not necessarily meaning that you start a business, but that you are opportunity seeking. So that you're looking at a challenge from the perspective of an opportunity instead of despair. And I think that's in part what unites the six organizations, and where we spend a lot of conversation, right, about where are the opportunities here for these communities and these individuals who live there, as opposed to, oh my gosh, the sky is falling, which it certainly sometimes feels like it is. And so I thought I would just give you a quick example that it's about 23 years ago. In the Arkansas Delta, in a small community, and this is an area that both Bill's organization and our organization serve. I was facilitating my first community meeting with a colleague, and it was one of those areas where the community had just lost a grocery store, businesses were closing. There were a lot of homes that had been left and were in disrepair, and all of a sudden, my colleague, who was just an entrepreneur through and through, he jumped up and he said, what an amazing opportunity. Look at all the businesses we can start here that have no competition. It's like writing a blank check. And all of a sudden, it was like the whole mindset began to shift in that meeting. And really what ended up happening was that the leadership team from that meeting forward got organized and said, you know what, we're going to start with a farmer's market and bring, you know, fresh produce back into this community. Down the road, we're going to focus on, you know, restarting a grocery store. Then the local catfish processing plant stepped up because they were already selling fish retail. And so the leadership team said, what if you started selling produce? And what if you started just selling some basic staples? What if you got certified for SNAP and there was their little grocery store? Then a young entrepreneur stepped up and says, you know what? I want to take some of these houses and I want to, you know, basically demolish them and start over and build a couple of homes and start flipping properties. And then a young woman said, you know what, there's that empty space in downtown. I want to start a little bakery and I want to serve really good coffee. And so all of a sudden, this didn't happen overnight, but that entrepreneurial opportunity mindset wasn't just with these young people starting businesses, but it was also with the leadership team. They got connected to the county judge, they got connected to state resources, they got connected to other nonprofits. They talked to the university about bringing a program in to train CNAs, which are certified nursing assistants, to really begin to look at opportunity from a place of despair is where they started. And so I think that kind of a shift is oftentimes required for entrepreneurs to be able to step up and feel supported and do their work. Which brings me to the example, the story that I just love to tell about Corey Adams. So I actually met Corey Adams at an amazing event that Bill's organization put on, and many of us from the Partners for Rural Transformation attended in Itabena, and had lunch, and this young Black man sits next to me, and he had all this experience working in Job Corps for Department of Labor, and decided that he was going to come home to Greenville, Mississippi and start a business and begin to take on contracts for Job Corps centers. And I thought, who is this guy, right? I mean, he was just so inspiring. And so I connected him to some of our technical assistance providers and to really think through and flesh out the feasibility of taking on these centers and what would be needed and what his staff would have to look like and what his financials would need to look like. And so as we did the set of projections for this first contract that he landed for $20 million, right? And so we sat down and we said, you know, to cash flow the beginning of this, you're going to need $625,000. So off you went to the bank, and the bank said, absolutely not. You're a startup, you have no track record, you have no assets, you have no collateral. So he came back to us and he said, can you help us? And, you know, we're a micro lender. And we said, well, we can't do $625,000. So I came back to the Partners for Rural Transformation and I said, this is exactly the kind of work we need to be doing, because that Job Corps Center went into Roswell, New Mexico. That is where the jobs are needed in that area of very high poverty. And so here you have this entrepreneur who's in Greenville, Mississippi, in a persistent poverty area, helping a community in New Mexico. And the partners stepped up, and Suzanne's organization, RCAC, decided to lead on the loan. And so we had 5 organizations make loans of $125,000 each. We shared the risk. We got him his $625,000, and now he's actually paying ahead of schedule because things are going so well. And now the money's really beginning to move, and he's trying to get us paid off as quickly as possible. He's just a super inspiring entrepreneur who's inspiring other people, but certainly inspired us too. So I'm really appreciative of the partners stepping up. This was our money, right? We put that money to risk from our own capital. Nobody gave us that money. We just said, let's pool it and let's make this happen. And it was really, it's been a real joy to work with him, but also with each of you.
I love that example. And if you can see, I smile every time I hear it. Unfortunately, Owista couldn't participate in that loan, but phenomenal. I mean, just phenomenal work. You know, what I find interesting, and we found in different various sessions throughout our conference this week, is talking about entrepreneurism and really looking at opportunities that are presented. But what we're finding as well, and what you touched on so eloquently, Inez, is we're finding generational, and within Indian country itself, we're seeing generational changes and opening of the mindsets, and success can breed success. Was if you saw your parents operating a business, we now are 1 to 2 generations in some regards, really recognizing that, seeing that, and that opens up a whole new breadth. And we hear these stories, and we're so wonderful at telling our stories. Now we're able to combine those with data, right? But I think at the same time, a lot of our barriers really are in regards to poverty itself, in regards to Indian country, in regards to a particular race. The change in our narrative is incredibly important. And what we generally find is the narrative is told on behalf of our communities by outside organizations, outside populations, based on perceptions. So Suzanne, I want to ask you, in looking at that, what we do collectively and what we find, why is that narrative change so important? And how are we creating a new narrative within PRT itself? And what do you find just within the industry? When we look, I think we're at a prime opportunity now with not only resources, but with people willing to change and look at how America was essentially instituted. Or this is a great time of, we keep saying, let's make this moment a movement, but a lot of that movement has to do with how we talk about ourselves, or how the world at large knows about us more. Can you let us know your thoughts in that regard?
Sure. It's a little humbling to go after the 5 of you. Every time I'm on screen or in a room with these folks, I learn so much, and I am just so grateful to be part of PRT. And when I think about changing narrative, and when we talk about it, it really is about, as Crystal alluded to, a shift of the power paradigm, right? We should have power over our stories. So, for example, for the first time in my life, which is ironic, running a rural organization, I live in town, I live in a city. I'm a rural girl. But when people ask me where I'm from traditionally over the years, if I say I live in rural America, I instantly get pushback. And they own the story because they bring their biases into the conversation. However, if I frame it differently and say rural is my culture, I own the conversation because they don't know what that is. They don't know what to think. So they ask questions about my story. So thinking about that, bringing our collective voices, experience, and geography together is really, really important. As you think about it, I talk about the rural West, and before, when we were individuals, we talked about our geography. We now have a lens where we can talk about our collective geography in persistent poverty communities. We can share stories, which my colleagues are so great about doing. So we share stories of people living in poverty across geographically, culturally, and racially distinct rural communities. But we highlight shared experiences, and we encourage unification to reshape narratives and really drive policy change. Non-metro persistent poverty counties are home to nearly 7 million people. They own their stories. Collectively, we own our story. We're working to craft a shared narrative that uplifts each other's voices and concerns. We all participate individually, each organization, in that discourse, but really coming up with a coherent, inclusive narrative that can persuade undecided audiences or counter the disciplined narratives of those who've already made up their mind who we are. We really want to share, emphasize the values of equal opportunity and community, highlight the systemic causes. We did fix it. How do we go about that? Describe a path from poverty to economic participation. really promote effective solutions and successes like some of the stories you've heard today. Those need to be elevated by us collectively. If we don't elevate them, no one else will. They've got their minds made up and they're on a pathway. The other thing that I think is really, really important, at RCAC, we're doing a data and impact initiative. And the best phrase I heard is, you measure what you care about. You measure what you care about. We care about persistent poverty communities. But if you go to databases, there's flawed information. For example, we all participated in a women's equality challenge. And so of course our narrative that we were going to submit was all about rural women. Except that if you try to find data about rural women, it's MIA. It's missing in action, right? Everything has been amalgamated. It's all been thrown together. Like rural is rural is rural, and this is what whether it's a child, whether it's an I mean, there's a lot more about elder, but whether it's children, whether it's women, it's all just all in one box, and you have to really sift through it to find it. So we are also working at changing that data lens by measuring what we care about and bringing all of those numbers together. And, you know, I think we touched on why is this important? It's important because we need to drive policy changes that shift the power paradigm in our favor, in your favor. We need to be able to bring resources. I think the CDFI discussion about the money coming to CDFIs and the most ever. We are in a moment here. And as CDFIs, I now have people who in my family even that really don't understand what I do because CDFIs are having a moment. Oh, maybe it's important. Maybe I should figure out what she does and what her organization does. So I think this is a moment and we have to capture it. And we have to change our narrative and we have to twist it. We don't just live there. It's our culture. And what does that mean collectively? And how do we educate and spread our narrative, not the one that has been created for us? So that's how I see the changing narrative and kind of how I think about it and the things that are important in my eyes.
I would have to agree wholeheartedly, Suzanne, and I think all of our other panelists do as well. Thank you so much. And I think that's something that we get very, very impassioned about. We could, you know, spend hours within our time really talking about what that is, how to change it. We've worked so hard collectively to try to get ourselves into new media outlets, major media outlets, or expand, you know, some of the opportunities that we have and, you know, somewhat underground measures per se. So I think that's always a push. And I think that it's a wonderful push in order for us to be able to narrate ourselves on different platforms. And one thing that I really do like is collectively, if Nick is in a room, Suzanne's in a room, Inez, Jimmer, or Bill, we all can somewhat walk within the same realms of what our pillars are, what need to be changed within just the paradigm of capital and governance. And that's a unified voice, so important. And speaking of and talking of voices or what those mean, again, I'm going to you know, somewhat come back to the state we're finding ourselves in a moment, hopefully a movement, but for the first time in, I don't know, maybe since the 60s, in all honesty, we're finding, and we've seen, you know, reverberating national narratives come up in regards to racism, in regards to marginalization, in regards to what that looks like in America. And we're at a juncture now, I believe, just with the past political administration, with disparities we see economically, racially. We're at a very big influx point of how we decide to, as a nation, address that, how we repair that, and you know, be able to look at how we move forward at inclusive measures for all colors. And you know, America is becoming a lot more browner than it used to be, and that scares a lot of people. in that measure, Nick Mitchell, I am bringing you up to round up the six musketeers that we have here. I will let our audience know that Nick's voice is always so appreciated to me personally, and I'm sure all of us within Partners for Rural Transformation, but he is brave, he is brazen, and he is unapologetic in so many measures of being that voice for, and essentially that's what a lot of us do. We are so very privileged to be able to be voices for individuals that, you know, not necessarily in populations that haven't been heard for generations upon generations. So Nick, when we look at institutional racism, that has resulted in huge health disparities, huge economic disparities, and, you know, so many isms within what poverty looks like. What do you feel Partners for Rural Transformation is really doing to address these disparities? And two, what can CDFIs do collectively to address this in measures that are beneficial to all of us? I know within your respective organization, you just took on Elon Musk, buddy. I mean, that's amazing, right? So in looking at, you know, in those measures, how do you feel and what do you feel our greatest strengths are? And what do you think needs to be addressed that can be a collective action we all feel deeply about, but can continue on as a movement, and hopefully not this being a moment?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks to Crystal for having us here. And, you know, like everybody else said, but whenever you introduce the six of us, I feel like I'm part of the Avengers or something, and I'm supposed to be or something like everybody else. You make it sound so great. And it is. Yeah, you know, the last couple of days I've been thinking about this question, and I thought, I said to my wife, I said, why did Crystal ask me to talk about institutional racism? And she looked at me and she goes, because you're the dumb white guy that caused this whole problem. You need to fix it, not the rest of us. And, you know, and so, you know, that's, you know, really where we're at. You know, when you heard Jim talk and he, you know, he asked the question, you know, Jim asked the question, so why isn't capital flowing in these areas, you know, and Inez told the story of, you know, of Corey and, you know, the bank saying to him, well, you're a startup and you don't have any capital and you don't, your credit's not good. You know, the things that they didn't say when they were telling their stories was there was also another answer. And it's like, well, because Corey, you're black. That's why we're not going to lend you money. And Jim, you know, Jim answered to Jim's question. It's like, well, you know, we're not going to put a whole lot of money down there where there's a bunch of Mexicans living on the border. You know, and this is the bottom line. And yeah, it is one of the constants that run through all of our areas. And you know, one of the things, you know, when Suzanne was talking, it's like, well, you know, this is what rule is, right? What Suzanne was talking about, rule is this, rule is that, rule is this. One of the other ones is like, rule is all white. Rule is not all white at all. Where I live, I'm literally one of the only, you know, Anglos that live in the whole town. It's not all white. And so we need to understand that. Not we don't, we get it, right? The system needs to understand. And the Partners for Rural Transformation has been glad to take this issue on and to talk about this issue and to bring this issue into the conversation and take advantage of this moment. And so to stand by these five folks and say, yeah, race is a problem in where money is being invested. And don't tell me that it's not, because we can look at that's what's happening. I mean, institutional racism is so incestuous. It's so part of the system. It's not even funny. I mean, just take the credit underwriting policies for mortgages, right? I mean, when you look at that, the credit, you know, when you look at credit score is supposed to be this predictor of the future of how you will pay. Okay, right there, it just starts off being racist, right? I mean, it's based on a system, it's based on an algorithm that's started with a middle income, upper income white man. And so that's where everybody has to go to meet this 690 score for a mortgage. You know, it doesn't take life experiences into the scenario. It doesn't look at, it looks at this white guy, that he had a good education, that he went to a good school, that he always had health care insurance, that he always was able to pay his bills because mom and dad helped him out through his, through this period or that period. But you never look at really life situations. Things are not looked at. It's always the individual's problem if you're in poverty, and not the system of why they're in poverty. And PRT is really taking that on. Some of us are involved with the big, secondary mortgage buyers, the GSEs, and with duty to serve, and working with them to figure out how can mortgage products be better suited for our communities, whether it be Native American communities or African American communities or Latino communities or low-income white folk communities, right? What can we change to actually look at our communities and how we pay, and how we're able to do, whether it be small business investment, whether it be mortgage investment, housing, but really bringing race to the forefront and not being afraid to talk about it. Folks like me are afraid to talk about it. Well, we don't need to talk about that. We understand that this is the thing. We shouldn't talk about it, but no, we should. And it should be the folks like me, that look like me, that say, okay, we have a problem in this country and we need to change it. And if we don't, then it will just be a moment. And I think bringing us together, the six of us together, and standing by each other, and as brothers and sisters, and saying, Inez is good at this, and Jim's good at that, and well, Bill's good at everything, and then how can we all do this together and change all of this stuff that that we talked about, about bringing capital in, about our stories, and about entrepreneurs. How do we do that together, about housing? And if we're going to talk about race, let's really talk about race and how it's really affecting us, and not just be a side story, but it needs to be part of the story. And that's the only way we're going to and take advantage of this moment, so that it becomes really what this country is supposed to be about, and is better for everybody. So I like being a part of the Avengers. I like part of being a PRT, because we are trying to take on some really, really, really tough issues. I mean, stuff that's been around for 400 and 500 years. When this country was started on slavery, it started on taking property and land from Native American people, and then we just got worse in some cases. And if we can't change that, and the six of us will die going to our grave trying to do this. But it's I am proud as can be to be a part of this group, and I started a thing called Mi Casita, which is to bring housing affordability into different communities. And the Native communities have taken this thing up, and I'm so excited. I'm going to the South Dakota Housing Conference here in October, and I get to speak at it. And I've got this whole plan. I got this agenda. They've got this agenda for me. I just can't wait. I get to do a sweat lodge and everything. But being able to be a part of that and bring an idea that I have to a place that I think might work is really cool. And then take back things that I learned there into my community to make them work here. That is really how we mix and match these racial barriers and make it work for everybody.
I think that was a perfect conclusion and culmination of what, how, and why. And you know what, Nick, I have to say, you shocked me when you were like, why did she ask about institutional racism? I'm the white guy. Oh my gosh, I didn't even pose it even thinking in those measures. I was more thinking of Mi Casa and all of the programs that you do for the colonias. Even, part of this community that is so phenomenal. I've never seen such a warrior in this regard. So I think perceptions are just kind of interesting in those measures too. I want to thank each and every one of you, our PRT members, for joining us today. We are eventually, as a WISTA in of itself. We're getting ready to do a whole brand new rebranding and open up our website and have additional information. So within that, I am going to have a tab of Partners for Rural Transformation. And I really implore anybody interested in what we're doing, whether it's reaching out to me or any of our members, and policy measures that you feel are important, funding measures or assistance. I can attest that we're all here to help, and we're all here to build a bigger band and a bigger tent for our communities and most vulnerable communities. So please do reach out. And again, we will be putting a separate tab within our website that highlights and has information consistently on Partners for Rural Transformation. So each and every one of you, I guess we have a new name, all of our former Avengers here. I hope that you all have a wonderful afternoon. I hope that our audience, and I'm sure they did, found this just as empowering, engaging, and enlightening. This work really excites us. I think that you can see that in the work that we all do. I think that we're very, very blessed to have found our purpose and working for something greater than ourselves. And the more we do that together, the greater we make those changes we're all touching on in these moments. And with the 6 individuals I'm so blessed to work with here, I know, as Nick attested, we will work our dying day to do so in our future generations. We're going to create something different and better. I know it, because we're not going to give anybody else a choice but then to do it. So in those measures, thank you all so very much for your participation. And I look forward to seeing you soon when we have our next meeting. So thank you. And I'm so very pleased as well that we are closing out and going to have a fireside chat, our own private chat with our very own Opportunity Finance Network CEO, Lisa Mensah. Lisa, I saw you pop on earlier. I am so glad to see you. So for those that don't know, we are closing out our day with a quick conversation, a very friendly conversation looking at the CDFI industry at large with our fearless leader of the industry. I send her emails all the time. I said, I'm so proud that you are our industry leader, Lisa Mensah, CEO and President of OFN. Welcome, 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 Lisa. How are you today?
Crystal, thank you. Well, I love you. You spoil me and you honor me with calling me a fearless leader. But clearly, there's a new standard. We want to be superheroes. Right. So thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And Oasis has done an awesome job with this beautiful Capitol convening. I cannot wait till we're back hugging each other again in person, but beautiful job. So lovely to be with you to close it out.
Oh, I love it. And just 2 things I would like to indicate to our audience today. Lisa has been a very, very busy woman on behalf of the CDFI industry itself. As we briefly alluded to in our last panel, our P funds were announced, and Lisa was having the CDFI industry on stage with Janet Yellen, Maxine Waters, Vice President Kamala Harris, and they're hearing and smiling ear to ear about CDFIs and our effect within economies, our effect to be able to help those most vulnerable. I think just as an industry, we have been, and we've talked about this, for years, and within our conference, the last 3 days itself, as CDFIs really being a best kept secret, whether that's in the 2008 crisis, but really looking at the pandemic and how we have coalesced as an industry, coalesced to assist each other in accessing federal programs. We're really at a pivotal point within our industry. And thankfully, so many different aspects of funders, of government agents are looking at us in a more sophisticated measure than they ever have before, regardless of us deploying billions for the past 30 years. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing on that stage, on that forum, and where you think we can go from here as an industry? And what do you need from us to help you?
Woo! Love the questions. What are we seeing at the level? What do we need? How do we go forward? Interrupt me, Crystal, so if we get it. Honestly, last week was just an incredible milestone. And the rapid response grants, I know, will be transformative to our CDFI industry, but they're coming at a time when the earth has been so parched for resources. So I am so pleased that they're going to be arriving, and that this terribly hard time of COVID, we've been able to secure these resources to help us. You'll be pleased that Maxine Waters kept saying, this is a down payment. So I love anybody that talks about down payment. It is a big milestone. And I know so many native CDFIs and other CDFIs are listening today. So let's just take a minute to breathe and to, I always say, a good shoulder roll and just honor what has happened. And what I really have been saying, that the feeling I had, and I know I'm standing on the shoulders of warriors and avengers that have built this field over the decades. So I was young once, and there were so many people I admire who have built this field, and I got to stand on a stage at the White House, but I know I did that on the shoulders of so many others. But the feeling was not one of CDFIs being a sideshow or something cute or a feature story. The feeling I had that day was one of peer, of partner. And I really think we have to take a deep breath and honor what just happened. When the Secretary of the Treasury speaks about us as partners to make the entire economy healthier, that is a powerful moment and connects the work of the 1,200 certified CDFIs, the 70 native CDFIs, as being relevant to the bigger systemic challenges. That to me was part of the power of this moment. It is clear that the Vice President has understood this. She may not have known a ton about this, I don't know, in her days in California as a prosecutor and as a senator, but thank you for all of you who spoke to her. And she definitely sees us, our field, as part of unlocking the power of this American economy. And to me, we're in a different moment in our industry when the systemic levers are talking about us. So this was a moment that Congress decided to get these funds to us. But the fact that we had a Secretary of Treasury and the two bicameral sides of Congress, the Senate and the House, the Financial Services Committee, and then the Vice President, to me, we should all take that we are no longer going to go backwards. This is a moment where we got to be in this financial system. I think you asked me to say a little bit about what the federal moment is. And Crystal, to me, it feels like never again are we going to go back to a thing where we are not important. We're invisible. We can't be seen. This feels to me like the moment when we say, we're here, and you need us. And we need to be better partners. And partners need resources. And partners need respect. And partners need to be treated like the experts we are at what we do, which is reaching our communities, reaching into the crevices of the economy that keep being missed by the front page and missed by the formal financial sector. So my excitement, I haven't had a chance to talk, there's only so much my kids are interested in this. So, but to me, this was a collective moment for shoulders back and a watershed moment where I feel our work was recognized for its current power, but its future potential. That's how I would say. We can keep talking a little bit. So where would you like to go?
I really do love that. One thing I'd like to touch upon too, and I think looking at the mass amount of resources that were deployed, thank goodness, federally, I found in a lot of our native CDFIs and rural communities found as well a whole new entrance of funding agents, whether that's from the private sector, whether that's from the corporate sector. And I think it was a culmination of, number one, looking at how money is spent. And within, our respective economy too, bringing up marginalized communities, and how do we really help build that infrastructure where people are coming to a cognizant moment kind of within humanity and capitalism, some of them. And, is my money working for good? Is my money not checking a box? I want to make sure that I'm getting the set impact I want with my funds. And again, this is coming from a myriad of resources in and of itself. We were so very fortunate as a WISTA, we were a recipient of Mackenzie Scott funding. That first round, in all honesty, as we're going through the initial due diligence and calls, I had no idea, nor did anybody else who's on the other end. And when we get the call for funding, I am astounded, absolutely astounded. Unrestricted funding that, WISTA, just as an organization, we all worried about this during the pandemic, not only ourselves, our portfolios, how are we going to provide services? We had to do that differently, and we had to pivot so intentionally to make sure to uplift and save community members, to save, tribal members, small businesses throughout the United States. OFN previous to the pandemic, and then through the pandemic as well, I think it's important to note as you see us being more solidified within the minds of federal government as partnerships rather than being a novelty. Also, other capital sources are looking at us different as well. We have been talking for years and years, industry at large, how do we bring in corporate funding? We talk about changing tax codes, we talk about changing CRA, but in looking at kind of pots that haven't really reached or breached our communities in terms of capitalization, partnership, investments, and equity opportunities, that landscape's changed. I would love for you to talk to us about the Justice Fund, about the initial relationship with Google, and where you think we're going as an industry, or what those opportunities look like. We talked a little bit about it this morning on the future of the native CDFI industry, but I think that's really interesting in our audience. And I know our native CDFIs and rural CDFIs, we are so incredibly remote. We don't have opportunities to talk to, Google, and I don't know if they'll be calling us, but you're making sure to really expand that tent and expand services with those initial breakthrough, in my opinion, relationships and opportunities for future participation.
Yeah. Well, that's the point of a good intermediary. And a good network should be cracking open the floodgates to influence, to money, to more voice. And I think that started to happen. I love this question, Crystal. I can remember you and I sitting and trying to not give up when others might have encouraged us to, about how we would crack the code on new investors. And I remember when people thought, the Bills and Jims of the world that were claiming we should go after $1 billion seemed, so far-fetched and unlikely. So this was a year of change, and it keeps, like attracts like. I don't know the physics of all of this, but I feel we've got to keep, the magnifying is happening between the public and the private sector. But let me give you a few reflections on private interest. We were a field that grew substantially with bank interest. We're lenders, every CDFI lends somewhere. And we were understood by other lenders, but it was largely so related to the bigger lenders' priorities. So for their CRA priorities or their footprints or their stakeholders, that's how they found us. So it left big gaps with banks. And I don't think our banking friends would disagree that it wasn't an even way of funding the field. So what started this year, to our joy, was new corporate partners and new philanthropic partners showing up with a sense of righteousness about, well, where is my money sleeping? Where can it do good work? And I think, Crystal, that was the motivation for a company like Google or a company like Twitter. And we've heard it. I was a little shy. I had I kind of made a mistake. When I met the Google team, we had met their philanthropic side, and they were really quite powerful, quite interested in supporting us. And when they introduced us to the treasurer and CFO, I was a little skeptical, a little shy that some corporate treasurer, and the treasurer said to me, but Lisa, we have values too. And I remember thinking, this is going to be different, you know. And I think the moment for the treasuries of corporate America that this crisis presented is that there were some winners in a very difficult time. There are companies that have very large, sizable cash balances. And where we started to innovate in the middle of the pandemic was, couldn't some of that cash sit with us, sit with CDFIs, not just for a year, for 10 years? Could we get there earlier than we thought? You know, somewhere in my dreams, maybe there would be a new asset class someday of CDFI paper held in corporate treasuries. But the moment that arrived this summer was corporate treasuries being willing to go earlier, to say, we're not waiting. We could hold muni bonds, which, you know, I'm sure they're doing good somewhere, but a lot of people can buy those. Let us do something now with our cash that we know will do good. And this is where all of the stories of what was happening, and some of my favorite stories to tell are with our native CDFIs, because I know how powerful and yet how parched the resources have been. So it's fun to be in the intermediary spot and to say, wait till you see that can happen. You know, if you can get resources to OWISTA, wait till you see what this looks like. You know, it's going to be great. And it's not just debt. We knew we needed those equity pieces. So I'm thrilled that there were individual philanthropic interests like McKinsey Scott, and we did have the philanthropic sides. You know, when Twitter made $1 million grant to OFN, that was their largest one-time grant that they've made as a company. They're relatively new. So this opens up this combination of debt and philanthropy from our companies. But I think when you said, is our money working for good, that really was a motivation for a new group of investors. We're not done yet. We haven't shaken every tree yet. We're going to keep going. And part of the point is, you know, even with Zoom, we can't all get to Silicon Valley. You know, there's only so many hours in the day. So we've got to have bigger, more efficient flows and use an intermediary like OFN to get this money to our members, you know. And people that know me, I like simplifying things. So I call it the go deep strategy. I mean, the point should be, when we get these new funds, how are we pushing into areas of persistent poverty? How are we pushing to smaller CDFIs, those who have balances, assets under management of under 25 million? And it's appealing to the very donors that we're talking to when we say, yes, we're a big field and we're a diversity of depositories and loan funds and credit unions and venture funds. But there are a side of this field that needs to be resourced, and they tend to be smaller. They tend to have not had the big philanthropic donors in their backyards. And that's where we need to go deep now. So to me, it's been working. We've been able to say this, the things that were coming up in the last session, the shame, I think, of America's unfinished work, of its deep racial ensconced disparity and inequality. And then there's this little band of CDFIs with like hammers, I think of us, you know, that build stuff, that move dollars, that get people into a home, that create opportunities for water and infrastructure, you know, that can move a small business forward, that can do something new. That's the real power that we offer these investors. They're going to see their money at work pretty quickly. And that kind of impact, I think there's lots of impact needed in the world, but the visibility of the changes we bring, the fairly rapidity of it, you know, you can have a business that's financed or a home that's financed. I think that helps us make this case. So I'm I'm convinced that we'll be successful in continuing to make the case to this new group of investors that, you know what they tell us, and I'll be quiet and let you ask something else as we get to the end. They tell us that corporations say when they make investments to our CDFIs, it's popular with their shareholders, it's popular in their boardrooms, but it's popular with their employees. People are going to work feeling better about a company that would take its cash and make investments that feed communities, maybe that aren't adjacent to them, but that are part of this country. So I like being able to argue for this field's power and for a group of investors that haven't been at the table in large measure. And I do feel, I feel that that's what we're calling people to. We named our fund the Finance Justice Fund. It's not everybody's word to say about justice, but justice is about righting past wrongs. Justice is about going deep. And the field of CDFIs are in a good place to make that very visible. So.
I love that, Lisa. I really appreciated your comment, and I have to attest, I agree wholeheartedly that as intermediary lenders, as OWISTA is too, we hold a unique position, but we have to be very cognizant of that position. More so building bridge and opening up capital. Obviously, at times we have the first initiative to receive the investments, and especially in markets people are uncustomary, and it's uncustomary for them to invest in. And one of the narratives, of course, we've been riling against 30, 40 years, 100 years, Indian country is a good bet. We're not a risky, look at our portfolios, look at the deep work, and that can be said for all of our CDFIs. But in that measure, looking at expanding that tent, and I think our native CDFIs really appreciate the relationship with OFN. I know I certainly do. We have worked together for nearly 17 years in co-hosting a native CDFI portion within the overall conference, realizing that, cultures and some of our barriers are a little bit different, but I have always really appreciated that space that OFN has offered and recognizing the differences of our communities in the industry. And I don't have the data to support it, but we work on the grassroots level each and every day with our CDFIs. But we're one of the fastest growing, segments within the CDFI tent as a whole, and that's because so many of our communities still are in financial deserts. This is a viable model to really start building assets and change the economic landscape of your community. So as we end our conversation, and I know you're so incredibly busy, and I am so grateful that you took this time with us, Lisa. What would be your message to our native CDFI industry? And on your part as well, we have a lot more native CDFIs being members than in the past with OFN being OFN members. So just a native kind of perspective of OFN's commitment to the industry. Any thoughts or closing remarks in regards to what that partnership looks like and the incredible work our native CDFIs are doing. We all are as an industry, but obviously this is the OWISTA platform and native CDFI representation. So
yeah. Well, it is incredible work and it's hard work. And when you have hard work to do, you need friends, you need allies. And so I want to first say thank you to all of you who joined OFN and over the last 17 years been part of the big convenings. But if you haven't joined, please do. There should be no reason you're not disloyal to OWISTA by joining us. And the way we can help connect is to have people join in membership. It's not a high fee, it's not a high bar. We need to be partners and all of us need friends. It works both ways. It was the stories of Una LeBeau that persuaded Vice President Harris that this is a field we want to back. So I want to thank the Native CDFIs, because it was your stories of clarity and of rebuilding and of what it meant to support women entrepreneurs that she keeps telling. So it works both ways, that we need this segment to explain. This morning, I had the opportunity to testify to the Senate Banking Committee, and it was the pilot that Forbans and Mazakska did with the USDA 502 program that was featured. And it was a moment for me to say, more, let's do more of this. Let's connect up our Native CDFIs with funding at the USDA, and let's move this housing that is so essential in our Native and tribal lands, and that Native CDFIs know to do. You asked me what to say a little bit about growth and where I see some of the future of Native CDFIs. I mean, I think that our Native groups, and I have visited many, and I just see this is kind of a perfect moment. And so I hope there's a lot of deep breaths, shoulders back, because there's so much unfinished work that our tribes need partners in these wonderful independent CDFIs to do. I love asking people where their dream is. Ted Piccolo, who's on our board, told me a little dream he had about working in homeownership on, with Northwest Native Development Fund. And he's the perfect person to do that. So I join with Ted in seeing a future where he's obviously a successful small business lender, but he too could be one of these lenders that also works on the construction and of housing and the provision of mortgages. And I see that who else is coming to do that in our Native areas? Who else? Who but Native CDFIs? So I see vistas of growth. And so if you're only managing, $5 million now or less, it's okay. We need you. And we need your sophistication about knowing your community. That's the power of the CDFI lenders. And we, the intermediaries around you, need to be equipping you with more capital, crashing through more of these doors, so that programs like the USDA 502 direct mortgage, which is a great mortgage and could be operating in tribal lands, can be expanded. So I see much ahead. I'm not one of these people that thinks that everybody's got to grow to be $1 billion or $100 million fund. There'll be many funds who will be small and effective. I think we've buried the vision that only in size can you be effective. I think some will be effective and be small and reach deep. It's like a powerful little tool to reach deep. So, but everybody needs friends. We're better together. We're better in allyship and in walking together and learning what we can do for each other. You have not just received, you have given, you, the network of Native CDFIs. Crystal, your leader, has given as a board member and as a thought leader to this field. And I honor you, Crystal, and thank you for the work you have done for this country and for your network. And I look forward to seeing this next chapter of growth. There are more products, there are more people to reach. And you are, in the end, you're going to help us heal this country's oldest sin, which was taking this country from the original inhabitants that were here. So I'm very, very proud to stand with you and look forward to more.
Snap, snap, I like that. Our original sin, land back, reparations will be, yes, I love that. Lisa, thank you for your time. And I know through the last several years and having been blessed to be a board member for quite a while within OFN. I miss you folks. Your leadership has been astounding, inclusive, and authentic. And I think that shows. So for the tireless work of you, your staff, on behalf of our industry and showing up in those places and corridors. And that's one thing I've always really admired, and I'd like to publicly thank. When you're in rooms, you never forget to mention Native America. You never forget to mention rural America. You never forget to mention persistent poverty. And you do it in a way that's respectful. And you also do it in a way that's very, very poignant, because we've got data to back it up, and we've got data to back up our successes. Stories are great as well. So in those measures. We really do know that you have our back when the doors are closed, or even if we know not what you're not doing, what you're doing that particular day. So with that, thank you so much, OFN, Lisa, Mensah, for helping us close out our plenary today. And I look forward to, yes, when we're together again, you're joining us at our native convening, and for the work you do, Chimiigwech. Thank you, Lisa.
Miigwech.
And to those of you that have joined us the last 3 days, maybe sessions here or there, I really hope that you found our conference impactful to our native CDFIs here and always. Thank you so much for the work that you do, for your tireless dedication, tenacity, and basically the grit that you show each and every day by continuing to work with and for your communities. This conference could not have been possible without our funders. So I think that it's very important to acknowledge our sponsors. Thank you very much to Wells Fargo, to NeighborWorks America, to Highlands SRI, Clearinghouse CDFI, and our in-kind sponsor, VinMob. Your support is deeply appreciated. We really enjoy being able to provide a larger platform for our CDFIs, investors, and individuals that are interested more in learning about the initiatives within Indian country itself. So if you're a first-time attendee, welcome, come back. If you're a long-time attendee, thank you so much for your dedication to OWISTA, to our native communities, and to learning a different mode of operating, thinking, and really reacting and acting in relationship with money, with capacity building, and with communities in a way that creates long-term systemic change and hopefully generational change, because I know that's something that means a lot to each and every one of us in our respective roles within this asset building industry. I do have to take a moment and let you know as well, I wish we were all in person for this measure, but to our staff that on the back end has been working tirelessly, helping moderate. Thank you so much, OWISTA staff. We could not do this without you. To our attendees, and most of all, also to our presenters. Thank you so much for providing wonderful and rich content that really helps build the capacity of bringing in more capital and changing narratives for Indian country. So with that, we look so forward to seeing you next year at our 7th annual Native CDFI Capital Access Convening. The location has yet to be determined, but we will let you know. I am very, very grateful for your 3 days of participation and hope that you all have a wonderful evening. And again, thank you for sharing time with our Native CDFIs these 3 days. Miigwech.